Hi guys, we're going to be talking about part 4 of Ransom in this video. Just before we get to part 4, let's have a look at the narrative structures of both of these texts, Ransom and the Queen. So in Ransom we've got 5 parts and they're really cleanly segmented into 5 chapters here. Let's have a look. There's a 5-part narrative structure, the first of which is Exposition, then we have Rising Action, we've got a Climax, we've got Falling Action, and a denouement, or the ending resolution part. So in the Exposition, that's where Malouf is setting up, sets the scene. In the Rising Action, we often have the problem part. What's the problem? And kind of leading towards that resolution. The Climax is where it all comes to a head. The Falling Action is where there's a resolution to the problem. Okay, and then the denouement at the end is kind of like, well, what happens afterwards? What's the result of the problem being fixed? Okay, so for the Exposition, we've got Achilles and Priam explaining their stories and their backstories. So part 1 and part 2 kind of mirror each other in that Achilles and Priam are really exploring who they are and what they're currently facing in present time. But they also dip back into their childhoods and how they came to be where they are right now. So I don't think it's really a clean exposition part for part 1. Actually, it dips into part 2 and explaining how Priam got to where he is as well. With the Rising Action, I think it's far more clear. This is Priam choosing to do something about it. Achilles can't save himself. He can't move on from his grief. And he's trying to by dragging Hector, but it doesn't work. The gods keep kind of betraying him or forcing him, back to square one because Hector's body is renewed every day. The Climax part is really clear that Priam is meeting Achilles and they have this conversation and this kind of really intense conversation with each other. And they really develop a lot of empathy there in that Climax. Part 4. The Falling Action there, we've got Priam and Somax taking Hector's body back, but we've also got this denouement, what happens afterwards, and we've got Achilles sitting in his hut, and we've got Neoptolemus killing Priam. There's kind of a lot of these little events that are thrown into part 5, little kind of glimpses of the future there. Let's have a look at how that compares to the Queen. So the Exposition part, if we want to use this 5-part narrative structure, so what I'm trying to do is just show, well, Ransom is clearly using this 5-part structure. We've even got 5 chapters to kind of mirror that, even though there's some overlap there. But can we apply that to the Queen? Well, at the part we've got this Exposition. Well, Tony Blair has been elected PM, so that's kind of setting the scene. We've got a Rising Action of Diana dying, and there's this building pressure placed on the Queen to grieve publicly, and there's tension between Blair and Queen Elizabeth. We've got a Climax, so we've got this moment where we ask, is Queen Elizabeth going to respond to Blair's promptings and the public's pressure? And she does that. We've got this Falling Action of Diana's funeral. We've got this extended montage, Diana's face and little news reports, news videos are in there as well. So we've got this extended montage of the day. We've also got Diana's brother speaking. He's giving the eulogy. So it's that Falling Action. We've got this resolution to things that is happening, and we've also got this denouement. At the end, we've got Queen Elizabeth meeting Tony Blair. So it does fit into this 5-part narrative structure, but I think there are some differences in that as well. So let's examine some of those. So for the Queen, the structure that Friers uses is really interesting in that he begins by setting this political conflict. And we've got a political conflict because Blair represents modernizing. He is not a monarchist. He wants to move beyond a monarchy and have England and the British Commonwealth kind of move beyond that. So his election actually sets the scene for a political conflict between the Queen and himself. So it's interesting that Friers chooses to begin his narrative with Blair's election and the Queen's response to that. In the middle bit, so we've got this sequence of a week. We start with a month before Diana's death, or months before Diana's death. Then we have this sequence of a week from Diana's death to her funeral, so from Sunday to Saturday. So it's really interesting, and Friers actually makes this really explicit by naming each day as it happens. So he's trying to show that, hey, there's a sequence of days here, and it's actually quite a short amount of time, that all this pressure is being put on the Queen, and Blair is choosing to act. So it's really interesting that we've got this bookending again of Blair at the end. So by bookending, I mean right at the start we've got Blair, and right at the end we've got Blair. Okay, so there's these two meetings that are set up. Blair is elected, then he goes off and the Queen asks him to set up a government in her name. That's what the normal protocol is. That's the process that they normally go through. So that's number one there. Number three, right at the end, we've got that the other meeting, the next time they meet, is at the end of the film. So Friers is bookending this grief and Diana's death and the royal family's reaction with discussions with Blair and this modernization. So Friers is really showing that there is a modernization happening. So this is my interpretation now. Friers is showing that there's a modernization happening, and Blair is a part of that, and the Queen is responsive to that, although she didn't want to be, but she is responsive to that modernization. So one way that you could articulate that is Malouf uses the five-part narrative structure quite explicitly, whereas Friers uses a sequence of days, which is bookended in his film with Blair's election win and second meeting where they get along. So you could explain it like that, perhaps use some more academic language than that. Okay, let's jump into part 4, the plot points here. At the very start of the chapter, we've got Achilles sitting apart from his men when eating. In order for them to eat, he needs to be present, and he needs to, put things on his plate, and then his men are allowed to do that. He has to have some wine in his cup, and then his men are allowed to do that. So he needs to be present. That is protocol. Automedon replaces Patroclus as Achilles' second in command. So Patroclus resents Automedon. He sees Automedon, and he is a reminder and a rebuke. So Automedon becomes a symbol for Achilles' failure. So Automedon reminds him of Patroclus, like, oh, normally a Patroclus would be doing what you're doing right now in serving me and helping me as my second in command, but also it's a rebuke to him. Automedon was there when Patroclus fell, and Achilles was not there. So every time Achilles sees Automedon, he's reminded of this grief and his own guilt at not doing the right thing or being there for Patroclus. Alcimus is there as well. So Alcimus is kind of second to Automedon. He's a young warrior, and Achilles is reminded of himself. He looks at this young guy who is not very self-aware, and he sees himself in that. Even a season ago, he says, I see myself there a season ago. So that's 1 year ago. So he sees an overabundance in him of an animal nature as well. So this young guy who's not very aware has this kind of animal nature, and he's licking his fingers and eating. There are lyre strings that are heard by Achilles. He says he's moving to his mother's element. So Achilles thinks he sees Patroclus at first. Then he thinks he sees his own father, Peleus. But it's actually Priam who turns up. Achilles kneels to Priam. This is unexpected for Priam. Priam had this vision in his mind that he would be kneeling to Achilles and begging him. In the picture we see there on the left that Priam is begging and on his knees to Achilles. That happens a bit later, so this surprises Priam. Achilles sees that the gods have ordained his meeting. Somax is brought in and questioned, and Achilles is trying to work out whether these are really Priam and Idaeus or not. And then Priam explains how his herald is normally used, but that these are different circumstances. Achilles actually has growing respect here, and there's in the chapter we see this growing respect and empathy for each other, and this connection, and that's symbolized first when Achilles sees his own father in Priam. So we all already have that connection between them. Achilles sees the humility in Priam and the shyness in Somax. Priam appeals to Achilles as a father and tries to convince him to give up Hector's body. Priam begs Achilles, so this is where Priam gets down on one knee to beg him. Priam reasons that Achilles would do the same thing as he would for his son. Achilles is shocked into a kind of stillness, feeling icy cold, reflecting over his life, over the sea and over time. So he's kind of like, it's like he's kind of having this spacey moment where he sees this extended period of time in his own life, and he goes way back to the beginning. He goes way back over the sea, the Aegean Sea, to see his son, and he sees his own father. Then he sees himself as an old man, and then he sees his son avenging him. So there's this weird moment where he sees himself as an old man, but Achilles never gets to be an old man. He dies in the Battle of Troy. Priam drops to his knees and sees his dream become a reality. So he sees that as the gods ordaining again that this vision he's seen is coming to life, and this is the right thing to do. And then Achilles agrees to give up the body of Hector. Achilles goes to Hector's body. It's made new again, as it's been done every time, and he feels released from his grief and anger at that moment. He walks in and sees it, and normally he's angry and he's grieved inside, but this time, when he sees Hector's body, he's released from all that. Hector's body is taken and prepared by some women. Achilles watches, but the women will not work with him there. So this is about position and place. Who is doing the right thing in this moment? And the women will not do their work because it's protocol that they work only when the men are not present. And in that he sees himself on the table too. He sees himself in his own death. Priam is awoken by Achilles, and Achilles says, "It is time." Just that nod to time as well. We've got this transcendence of time, back and forth, way back across the seas as well. So it's about time, or now is present, now is time to do something and actually leave and fulfill this vision he's had. Priam washes himself and reflects on the strangeness of the situation while Achilles watches him. The scene mirrors Priam's dream of Heracles. So I thought it was interesting that in this scene, Priam is there being watched by Achilles in his armour, with his sword, with his armour on, which is very similar to Priam's dream, and when he reflects on when he was a child and as Pedases, and Heracles is there and grabbing his head, and kind of so those mirror each other there. Respect has been built between Priam and Achilles. On the way out, Priam acts as the king as he gets into the car. So he does not allow the Greeks to see any emotion, and in not allowing them to see emotion, he's behaving like a king would behave. Achilles offers to be called upon by Priam when Troy falls. So this is a really tender moment. Actually, Achilles has developed such respect that he says, you know, when Troy falls and it's burning and everyone's being killed and slaughtered, if you call out to me, I will come and defend you, and I'll come and save you from whoever's attacking you, Priam. Priam responds in a really interesting way. He says that Achilles might already be dead at that time. So while there's that respect there, Priam responds by saying, actually, you might be dead by then. So it's too late for that. Just some symbols in this chapter. So we've got Alcimus. He is a symbol for youthful exuberance. He is a symbol for Achilles' lost youth and his lost innocence. Achilles chews loudly. He's unaware of how he's perceived. Achilles likes to have Alcimus around him, though. And it says this, as a reminder too of what he himself was just a season ago. So before the events of Patroclus, that's what Achilles felt he was like. There's a lyre. There's these silvery notes of the lyre touch and change the air, which symbolizes God's intervening. That a change is coming. There's this sound out of nowhere, and Achilles is acutely aware of it, and then he looks around, and then he sees Priam, and the lyre symbolizes that redemption is coming. There's a change that's coming here. I thought this was interesting how Achilles mistakes Priam for Peleus. Achilles actually calls out, he thinks it's Patroclus at the very start, and then he calls out father. He thinks Priam is his father, Peleus. So this shows Achilles' weakness and longing to be redeemed from his grief. He's projecting what he wants to be there, and it's neither Patroclus nor Peleus. And then he realizes that it's Priam. And it says Achilles continues to feel tenderly vulnerable to all those emotions in him that belong to the sacred bond. So he, despite, at first he sees Peleus, and then he's got these kind of sacred bonds to that father, and he feels vulnerable because his father's turned up. But when he realizes it's Peleus, he says that he continues to feel tenderly vulnerable. He continues to do that. He chooses to feel vulnerable even when he knows it's Priam. This sets the stage for Priam to beg for Hector's body. This idea of names comes up again, not so prominent as the earlier parts or chapters. So Achilles asks if Somax is the famous Idaeus. Somax is not sure how to explain his position, but we've also got this idea of Achilles seeing himself in Alcimus. So there's these names. Achilles is resentful of Automedon replacing Patroclus. So we've got that naming again. And Achilles looks beyond Priam and sees an old man he would never be. So I guess this is not so much a naming one, but he sees in Priam himself as an old man, but that old man will never become a reality because Achilles dies in the Battle of Troy. Let's look at some important quotes now. Remember, it's your job to stop and explain these quotes yourself. You need to write them, so you're practicing the skill of writing and explaining what these mean. And please use the vocab at the bottom if you can. You might need to look them up first. It is just the noise that grown men make when they are in company and afraid of where silence might take them. So this is at the very start. Men here in battle are making noise and grunting and groaning and yelling and having fights and things like that, but they don't want the silence. Here this quote says that they don't want silence because they might actually be prompted by thoughts of home and family, or maybe even their own death, because they're in this war, this battle. Automedon's presence is a reminder and a rebuke. It was Automedon who stood astride the body and, blinded by tears, fought the Trojan jackals off. Him, not me. So Achilles notes that Automedon is the one who was there when Patroclus died and took his body back. I have come to you, Achilles, just as you see me, just as I am, to ask you, man to man, as a father, for the body of my son, to ransom and bring him home. We've got our little title there, ransom, but I think more meaningful is the man to man, as a father. So he's actually trying to reason with him, not in terms of being a king or a leader. It's actually about being human, and we have this connection as human beings to each other. It's called empathy. Priam is reminded of his escort, Hermes, the giant killer, and is encouraged. So Priam is encouraged by remembering, Hermes took me here, and Hermes is named the giant killer in that bit. The lyre adds a dreamlike quality. This scene is outside of time, special and perhaps divine. So this lyre, which it seems to be kind of a random thing to throw in there, but it actually indicates that Achilles is experiencing something other, something divine, something far beyond the current company that he's keeping with these guys eating and drinking and yelling. Beyond this old man, who claims to be Priam, king of Troy, hovers the figure of his father. So Achilles sees his father through Priam. And how can he explain, with Priam there to hear it, that this king, who is in his care for all his grave authority, is as innocent of the world as a naked newborn babe, and just as helpless? So Achilles feels stripped bare. He feels unaware. He's not really sure where to go. Priam seeks to appeal to Achilles as a father. As a father there. I think that's a really key quote, to appeal as a father. Think of what it would mean to you, Achilles, if it was Neoptolemus's body. So he says your son. So I've used square brackets there because I needed to change the quote slightly to suit my sentence. It was Neoptolemus's body that was lying out there, unconsecrated after 11 days and nights in the dust. So he's trying to appeal to this sense of empathy within Achilles. Think of what it would mean to you if it was your son. Begging you, Achilles, as a father and as one poor mortal to another. So mortal to another is about being human. And as a father, so its position in relationship to the person who's died, to accept the ransom I bring and give me back the body of my son. It does high honour to us both, to both of us, to act as our fathers and forefathers have done through all the ages, and show that we are men, children of the gods, not ravening beasts. So actually, to act like this and to reason like this and to bargain, that means that we're not beasts, we're not animals in the way we interact with each other. We're not just here to slaughter each other. Actually, this connection between humans is really important. Priam's evocation of the boy Neoptolemus has touched a sore spot whose ache he had long suppressed. So actually, when Priam starts talking about his son, it's a sore point for Achilles. We are mortals, not gods. We die. Death is in our nature. We should have pity for one another's losses. So there's this empathy that's growing between them, and Priam is reasoning, actually, just because we're enemies doesn't mean we should behave like animals or behave without this ceremony and decorum. With no concern any longer for pride or distinction, do what is most human. So it's interesting that it's even named. Priam names it like that. Do what is human to do, which is bury your children when they die, show empathy and responsibility for each other, just because we are humans, and that's what we should do. What he has witnessed in the illumination of the moment, the endings of things in the days after his death. So I thought it was interesting to show that quote mirrors Prince Charles trying to be seen to be modern and preparing for his own reign. So it's that looking forward. Priam falls to his feet out of instant fellow feeling. So it's interesting that just that that alliterative phrase, fellow feeling, but it's about connection between people. So the scene is acted after all. Priam sees that his dream has become a reality. So the scene is acted. Here was an interesting thing with so it's an extended quote, but it's about the looking up into the sky and into the stars, and seeing the gods interacting in this divine intervention kind of thing. A breeze has cleared the sky of cloud and the stars, some huge and single, other is shoals or clustered, hang so low that Achilles believes he can smell them. The air out here is so fresh and clean after the smokiness of the hut. He steps outside after talking to Priam, after agreeing to give up his body. He steps out to go and see Hector's body, and when he steps outside, he sees the enormity of the stars and the clear sky, and he says he can smell them. It's so fresh and clean. So it's that renewal that renewing of him. He's been redeemed in that moment. Priam has come and redeemed him by taking the body back. And that is reflected in how he sees the sky and he smells this freshness and cleanliness there. Achilles begins a cathartic process. So cathartic is to heal yourself or to do something, and that heals. The air and freshness are an indication of something new or being rejuvenated. The stars are symbolic of the gods being close to this event, in charge or interfering or intervening. So that's your interpretation. Are they interfering or are they intervening? Is it a reference to ancestors or the dead? Now I wondered whether all these stars that are referred to, they're referred to like this: Hector's body shines as with the light of another star. That's what happens later on that page, is a description of Hector's body looking like a star. So is Achilles looking up into the sky, is that a reference to all the ancestors, all of these people who have died, and all of these people who are special in some way? Or is it divine, is it gods looking down? So it's interesting that Hector's body is described like that. Hector's body is made new again each day, laid out as a challenge to him. So Achilles describes Hector's newly remade body as a challenge to him from the gods. Each morning when he discovers yet again how the gods have defied him, he is maddened anew. So he gets so angry because Hector's body has been made new again. And so then he goes through this whole grieving process and anger. Something in him has freed itself and fallen away. So we've got this sense that he is actually healing now. Something in him has freed itself and fallen away, a need, an obligation. Everything around him is subtly changed. So he is changed, but everything around him seems to have changed as well for Achilles, now that he's giving up Hector's body. Some cleansing emotion that flooded through him has cleared his heart of the smoky poison that clogged and thickened its every motion, so that whatever he turned his gaze on was clouded and dark. Hector's body is no longer an affront to him. So he's describing how it used to be for him seeing Hector's body, and everything was clouded and dark when he turned his gaze on anything. But now that he's given it up, Hector's body is no longer an affront to him, and he actually sees clearly everything else. A few final quotes, guys. They are in perfect amity. Amity is like friendship or to be united. Their part in the long war is at an end. This mirrors Blair and Queen Elizabeth discussing the events at their monthly meeting. They're becoming united again. So even though Priam and Achilles are still enemies of each other, they're actually having this moment that they are friends despite that challenge, that they're on opposite sides to each other. It is their world. Achilles watches the anointing of Hector, but the women will not work with him there, because that's the women's world. That's what they understand. And so that's about classes and actually what Achilles is supposed to do. Priam says a similar thing, that that the natural world out near the river was not in his sphere, and also that women's talk was not in his sphere, when Hecuba talks about giving birth. Achilles is touched by the old man's dignity, even in sleep, and his thoughts fly once again to Phthia and his father Peleus. So Achilles watches Priam sleep. Achilles gets up early that morning, and Priam is exhausted and sleeping. Achilles is just about to wake him up, but again Achilles sees his father. So there's this connection that they have. It is time, Achilles says. It symbolizes a moment that has been anticipated for a long time. A time of living. So it's interesting that one of the terms of this agreement that that Priam and Achilles come to is that Priam and Somax will be allowed to travel back to Troy, and they will have a period of time of grief where there will be no fighting. And they call it a time of living. And so that's really ironic that this time of grief is a time of living. They're actually going to honour Hector's death and grieve and bury him, but in that they name it as a time of living. So that's an ironic thing where they're grieving about death, but that is what it is to live. Maybe that's the human experience. Call on me, Priam, when the walls of Troy are falling around you, and I will come to your aid. So Achilles offers Priam help. Achilles sees that Troy will win. Priam responds in an interesting way. It is, Achilles knows, a joke of the kind the gods delight in, who joke darkly. So Priam suggests that he would come... Achilles suggests that he would come to Priam's aid if Priam calls out, but Achilles may be dead before then. So they see that as a joke, like that Achilles views the gods intervening, that gods like to joke that way, in a really morbid way, that, well, you're going to be dead anyway. So that's the kind of jokes that the gods play. Let's have a look at some comparisons to the Queen here. You know, what bigger moments can we draw comparisons between Ransom and the Queen here? This theme of release or liberation, maybe it's redemption. Maybe Achilles is redeemed by Priam. Priam comes to take Hector's body, liberating Achilles from his grief, his anger, and maybe that possession. It seems in part one that the god Ares has kind of possessed Achilles. Ares is never named, but he's overcome by some other colour. You know, he changes colour, is what it says. And this mirrors Blair calling on Queen Elizabeth, prompting her to act and grieve publicly, liberating her from public condemnation. Blair could have just let Queen Elizabeth fall on her own sword, meaning if Blair didn't interfere, then maybe the public would not like the monarchy anymore, and maybe that sets the stage for change. So Blair actually mirrors Priam in that they both go and liberate their kind of enemy or their opposite leader. Enemies assisting each other. So Achilles assists Priam in his grief by giving back his son. In doing so, he heals or moves beyond his own grief. So Achilles gives Priam what he wants, but Achilles gets what he wants as well at the same time. Blair assists the Queen in her relationship to the public. Blair wants to modernise, but assists the monarchy in maintaining itself. Blair actually looks really good when he initially describes Diana as the people's princess, and Blair actually helps the Queen to look better in her by helping her with her response. We've got this theme of family. Priam appeals to Achilles' fatherly nature. We've also got Somax loving his sons, though they are dead, so that's similar to Priam. Queen Elizabeth talks of herself as a grandmother, and she puts that into her tribute at the prompting of Blair's helpers. They add as a grandmother, so to that tribute. There are many scenes of Blair also sitting with his family and eating breakfast, and I thought that was interesting that Blair is portrayed as this family guy, often in casual dress, sitting around the breakfast table with his family and looking at the news. They're always watching the news. Conflict. So we've got Priam finally meeting Achilles, and this is a moment of conflict between the two, and they're not sure how it's going to play out. But it plays out in ways that are similar to what Priam had envisioned, and different as well. Achilles drops to one knee first, and Priam didn't see that coming. But then when Priam drops down to one knee to beg, then he sees that his vision has been fulfilled. We've also got this conflict here with Queen Elizabeth is adversarial when dealing with Blair's phone calls. So the Queen is always polite, so she's always fulfilling that role and protocol and how you talk to people with politeness, but really there's a lot of angst in those phone calls. So there's this conflict throughout and there's this tension. It's quite subtle the way they talk to each other, and you might not realise there's anger or there's bitterness there, resentment, because Blair is being really careful in the way he responds, or speaks, and the queen is trying to tell him, you know, bugger off. It's not your place to say these things to me. But that's where the Queen Elizabeth is needing to modernize. Actually, the PM might actually call on her to do different things like that because of this modernity and the shifting nature of the way the monarchy is perceived. The last thing here, God-ordained interference. So there's quite a bit of it in Ransom, and I know that we've seen quite as much explicit kind of godly intervention or interference by God or talk about God in the Queen, but here's something that I thought you could kind of draw upon if you wanted to. The meeting between Priam and Achilles is seen as God ordained. We've got the lyre. We've also got these kind of flashbacks, flash forwards, this extension of time. Achilles is released from his grief. It's almost a spiritual moment of release. We could talk about the symbol of the stag here. Queen Elizabeth sees herself in the stag, so she sees the stag in nature, and it is beautiful, and she has this moment of just adoring this thing, and then shooing it away. She doesn't want it to be killed. Could we see this as the Queen Elizabeth is seeing herself in the stag, who is, you know, coming to the firing line? In this instance, that the public might actually condemn her for the way she's reacted to it? Or does Queen Elizabeth see Diana in the stag? Diana is, you know, a beautiful person who's done wonderful things. Does Queen Elizabeth have this moment of revelation where, oh, Diana is dead and she was wonderful, even though Queen Elizabeth had her issues with Diana, but she actually sees Diana as the public sees Diana, as this beautiful role model doing wonderful things in the world. So it's this chance moment, and that's really explicit in Ransom, of a chance moment, or chance, and being able to act. And I thought it was interesting that you could kind of bring that idea in as a comparison. It's quite different, but that's fine. They are worthy of comparison there. All right, guys, have a lovely day, and good luck with your studies.